Hi, this is Rev Ed with today's Back Porch Devotional from Genesis chapter 28, verses 16 through 22. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you." Jacob awakes from his amazing dream of the staircase that is going up to heaven, where he sees the angels ascending and descending on it, and hears the voice of God confirm the covenant with him. And he is duly impressed, although it is clear that he doesn't fully understand how this covenant business with God works. God chose Jacob not because Jacob had done anything or would do anything that God required, but simply because of his sovereign grace. God elected Jacob while he was still in the womb to be the inheritor of the promise to Abraham. And Jacob has not got it fully understood. He thinks it's a conditional thing. He knows that something awesome has happened. He names that place Bethel, which means house of God. But he's kind of got the idea that this is a particular spot where God is, and maybe rightly so. I guess if any of us had a vision or a dream like that, we would think that particular place was very special. But what we have to remember, and what Jacob has yet to figure out, is that God is everywhere, and that every place is sacred to him. He created the whole world. It's all his, and his presence fills it. But Jacob is still working through these things. And he then makes this promise to God, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in the way that I go, and will give me food and clothing, and let me come again to my father's house in peace, then the Lord will be my God, and I will make this into God's house, and I'll give a tenth of everything that I have to God." Jacob thinks that if God does these things for him, then he will be God's faithful follower. Then he will lift up God's name. Then he will give him a tithe of all that he has. Jacob has not yet figured out this business of grace. He thinks there's a transaction to be made. He thinks that if he does certain things, then God will do certain things for him. And very often, that is how we approach God. We live a decent life, and we go to church, and we give our money, and we do good deeds, and then we expect God to do stuff for us. It's almost at times like we treat God like a divine vending machine. If you put in the right combination of coins, then you'll get out the item that you've punched up the buttons for. God doesn't work that way. God gives what he gives, and he withholds what he withholds. But his grace has no strings attached, as Paul writes in the 2nd chapter of Ephesians. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved, and raised us up with him, and seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. What Paul is making plain to us is that faith itself is a gift from God, that grace is God's gift to us that enables us to turn to God in faith, and that he does this before we are even able to recognize him. For we were dead in our trespasses before we came to know God in Christ. And Jacob was dead in his trespasses before God reached out to him. And he still doesn't understand that this is not a transactional relationship. God has done for Jacob simply because he is sovereign and he chose Jacob, even as God chose you and chose me, not because we deserve it, but because, as Paul says, of the great love with which he loved us. And so there are good works for us to do, as Paul says. We are his workmanship, which in the Greek is essentially a word that means masterpiece. We are his masterpiece, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Doing good works and doing the things that God has called us to do is a result of grace and a result of faith, not a precondition. We don't do these things and then hope God will bless us. God has blessed us, and we respond in gratitude by walking in the way that he has showed us. Grace comes to us totally undeserved, which is the beautiful thing about it and the puzzling thing about it, because if we were in charge of the world, we wouldn't run things this way. So we, like Jacob, have to figure out how this actually works. Jacob is stumbling towards the light, but he's not there yet. And we have to remember that the light is always there. It's not something that we can earn. There is no gift that we can offer to God, whether it's a tenth or 20% or 50% or all of what we own. It is not a matter of doing for God so that God will do for us. God has already done for us in Jesus Christ, and through faith in him, we are the heirs of all of the kingdom of heaven. And God has prepared a life for us that we can walk in and be satisfied, giving glory to him, and that is mighty good for us. God's blessings be upon you this day.